This was Alexei Navalny just yesterday, smiling, making dark jokes during a court appearance via video link, very much alive. Russia's most vocal opposition figure was being held here in a remote Arctic prison, serving a 30-year jail term. Today, Russian TV channels broadcast brief, understated announcements of his death, supposedly having fallen ill after a walk. Greeted by a standing ovation at the Munich security conference, Navalny's wife Yulia spoke just hours after news of his death broke, placing the blame squarely on Russia's president.
If this is true, I want Putin and all of his entourage to know that they will be held accountable for what they've done to our country, to my family and to my husband. And that day will come very soon. And I want to call on the entire world community, everyone in this room and people around the world, to come together to unite and defeat this evil, defeat the horrific regime that is now in Russia.
International condemnation from world leaders has come thick and fast. President Biden saying Navalny's death underlined the need for continued funding for the war in Ukraine.
As people across Russia and around the world are mourning Navalny today because he was so many things that Putin was not. He was brave, he was principled, he was dedicated to building a Russia where the rule of law existed.
There should be consequences because there's no doubt in my mind this man was a brave fighter against corruption, for justice, for democracy, and look what Putin's Russia did to him.
One leader who did not have anything to say, Vladimir Putin. He made an official visit to a factory, but mentioned nothing of the death of his arch-rival. Navalny himself, before being detained, had discussed the prospect of his own demise.
Если это произошло, это означает, что мы необыкновенно сильны в этот момент, раз они решили меня убить.
Navalny first emerged as a political force over a decade ago, condemning the Russian leader and his allies as corrupt thieves. Protests swelled ahead of elections, and Navalny became one of the most prominent faces of the country's embattled opposition. In Russia, that's a dangerous role to play. Navalny was attacked on multiple occasions and dragged through the courts. In a country ruled with an iron fist, he dared expose the rot at the very top. This video, uncovering Putin's secret, opulent palaces, was viewed by tens of millions of people online. Navalny was barred from running for president in 2018. 2 years later, a fellow passenger captured the sounds of him groaning on a flight. The Kremlin had had enough of Navalny. He'd been poisoned using the nerve agent Novichok. Navalny was taken to Berlin for treatment, but was determined not to be just another Russian dissident living abroad. In an incredible prank call, he phoned a Russian intelligence officer and managed to trick him into admitting the intelligence services had laced his underwear with poison. Navalny decided to fly back to Russia. "I'm an innocent man," he told reporters, but he must have known what awaited him. A brief kiss with his wife, and he was led away. Mass protests followed his arrest, along with a brutal crackdown. Navalny had begun his political career as an ultra-nationalist, on occasion making offensive remarks about migrants. But it's his defiance of Vladimir Putin's regime that came to define him. Across Russia today, residents and activists paid their respects to Navalny under the watch of the security forces. Some were detained. Presidential elections are due next month. There's no doubt who will win. Will Navalny's death serve as a warning of the cost of standing up to Putin, or galvanize opposition to him?
Well, opposing President Putin can be a dangerous business. The list of those who have ended up behind bars or worse includes both politicians and journalists. The Putin regime stretched back decades. In 2006, the streets of London became the setting as former KGB operative Alexander Litvinenko died after being poisoned with radioactive polonium. An open verdict was recorded in the death of the Russian billionaire exile Boris Berezovsky, who was found dead in his home in Berkshire in 2013. The coroner couldn't be sure if he had killed himself or was the victim of foul play. Whether the deaths took place in Russia or abroad, their suspicious nature continued. In 2015, opposition leader Boris Nemtsov was shot dead in the shadow of the Kremlin. His death was mourned throughout Russia. Journalists have also died in suspicious circumstances. In 2006, Anna Polokhovskaya was found dead in the lift of her apartment block. For years, she had written for Novaya Gazeta on corruption in Russia. It was one of the few publications left that dared criticize the Kremlin. In the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Novaya Gazeta was forced to close its Russian office, and its editor Dmitry Muratov was branded a foreign agent as threats to his life and work became more overt.
Я занял свое место. Когда в вагон вбежал молодой человек, спросил, кто тут, вы Муратов? Я сказал, да. Он говорит, вот тебе.
The Wall Street journalist reporter Evan Gershkovich is currently being held in a Moscow prison on charges of espionage, with Russian security services claiming he collected state secrets. He and the Wall Street Journal deny all charges. Another in jail is opposition politician Vladimir Kara-Murza. Despite the obvious threat, he returned to Russia in the aftermath of its invasion of Ukraine to oppose Putin's actions. Within weeks, he was arrested and is currently serving a 25-year sentence for treason. Well, I've been speaking to Nina Khrushcheva, Professor of International Affairs in the New School, New York, and granddaughter of the former Soviet Union leader Nikita Khrushchev, and Boris Akunin, author, friend of Navalny, also put on Russia's register of extremists and terrorists for his criticism of Moscow's war in Ukraine at the end of last year. And I started by asking Professor Khrushcheva why, if this was a political killing, Putin would do it now.
He has been treated in prison in penal colony very, very badly. He has been in solitary confinement almost every week, every month. He has been reprimanded for having not buttoned the right way. And ultimately, as especially Russian history shows, this could lead to death. So political killing or not, it was a killing by the state.
Boris Akunin, is this a sign of strength or weakness from Putin?
I'm not sure that he was deliberately killed today, but I'm definitely sure that he was assassinated by the state. I totally agree. He was slowly killed during 3 years. And before that, we all remember, they had attempted to assassinate him by Novichok, by poison. He miraculously survived. He was sent to what they call shizo, punishment cell, 27 times, each time for 2 weeks. So I don't think anyone would have been able to survive this ordeal for long. So they killed him. And I think this is going to make the system weaker, definitely, because a killed political leader becomes totally immortal, and he becomes a symbol, a banner, and a big, big problem for the state. And the thing is that you can do anything more to him.
We saw his widow in the Munich Security Conference talk about Putin being held to account. Is there, in truth, any chance of him ever being held to account?
Well, it's hard to say, because is there any chance for him to actually leave power and then be held to account? It doesn't seem likely. Although, of course, what happened to Navalny now, he's become a symbol, he's become a martyr. He already has been a martyr, but now he's cemented as this symbolism. So weak states have weak liberties. So it's going to get worse and worse, and more oppression will come, which now Putin gets more and more paranoid. So the more you kill, the more you need to kill in order to keep yourself in power. I don't see, unless he's taken out, how he's going to be held accountable. However, of course, as Russian history once again shown us, Stalin got held accountable after his death in 1953. So the accountability will happen. Whether it will happen in Putin's time, the time he's alive, that's a question. But in some ways, he is certainly not cementing his legacy the way he wanted to, the great leader Russia ever had. It's going to be yet another forms of Stalinism than he inflicted of the Russians. So Russia would then, poor Russia would have to start cycling out of the neo-Stalinism, Putinism yet again. And in this sense, he will certainly be held accountable. Unfortunately, this may happen not only after his life, but even our lives.
Boris Akunin, I mean, this must be very frightening for the families of other dissidents. You think about Vladimir Kara-Murza, obviously, who is in jail. I mean, you are also wanted by Russia. They regard you as a criminal. I mean, are you a little bit more afraid today?
No, it would be strange and ridiculous to be afraid for me living in London when there are a lot of people in Russia who are in real danger, in danger of imprisonment, of assassination, whatever. No, I'm definitely not afraid because, well, there are a lot of political prisoners in Russia and a lot of people who will be arrested now as a result of what's happening today, because I totally agree that the regime from now on will tighten the screws, will become even more oppressive. This is pretty much inevitable.
How do you want the international community to respond then? I mean, the truth is that we just live in an age of impunity. He can do what he wants, really, as long as people leave him in power.
It is true that the only way to get rid of Putin is the revolution in Russia. So the only hope to overthrow Putin is the Russian people. There is no other way. As well, regarding the Western leaders, I sincerely hope that after this, they will rethink their intention, if there is any, to start negotiating with Putin. This is someone who cannot be dealt with. That person is a criminal. He's a monster.
Professor Khrushcheva, obviously, the political situation in America comes into play again. What difference do you think it makes if Donald Trump comes back into power?
I'm not sure that it will make any difference with Donald Trump, because remember when Donald Trump was becoming president and he was told that Putin kills his political opponents and Putin is a murderer, and to which Trump shrugged his shoulders and said, well, we kill people too. So for him, another death is probably not something of a big deal. And certainly he already, at least 4 years ago, 5 years ago, he already dismissed that kind of Putin reputation as something that great leaders really need to do things that make them stronger. So the question is whether the Congress or the House of Representatives, who has not been able to sign an agreement, give Ukraine more assistance, maybe they will reconsider.
Boris Akunin, finally, I mean, what is Navalny's legacy? Why was he different?
He had a lot of charisma. He appealed to different social groups, to different ages, which is a very real thing. And besides, I think that his most attractive feature was his optimism, his wit. He made fun of everything, even from his prison cell. And it is something very rare for a Russian revolutionary. Most of them tend to be very, gloomy, determined, fanatical. He was not like that. He was not like that. But I think that now he will become even bigger than he was in life, because what we are witnessing now is the birth of a legend. And legends politically and historically are a very powerful thing.
Boris Akunin, Professor Nina Khrushcheva, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, following the reported death of Alexei Navalny, President Biden was quick to insist that any opposition by Republicans to sending more support to Ukraine for its war against Russia should now be dropped. A bipartisan bill to allow funds was recently passed by the Senate, and the president angrily warned the House of Representatives history is watching them. Kate Fisher joins us now from Washington. Kate.
Well, President Biden's frustration with those House Republicans was as clear as his anger over the death of Navalny and his anger at President Putin. By contrast, Donald Trump, who is likely to be his presidential opponent come November, has kept pretty quiet about this, posting about his poll numbers and other sundries on his Truth Social platform. His opponents, Trump's opponents, have long accused him of being cozy with President Putin, and some of his allies in the House of Representatives are now holding up this bill which would give $60 billion of new aid to Ukraine to help it to repel that Russian invasion. Well, today, President Biden excoriated them, barely disguising his anger in the fact that they've left to go on a break without bringing that bill to the House floor.
2 weeks, they're walking away. 2 weeks. What are they thinking? And it's just reinforcing all the concern and almost, I won't say panic, but real concern about the United States being a reliable ally. This is outrageous.
But not all Republicans and members of the party are on the same page. Today, Donald Trump's former Vice President, Mike Pence, saying there is no room in the Republican Party for apologists for Putin. But of course, one of those apologists could potentially be back in the White House if Donald Trump wins the election in November. And he has also just recently made those comments about NATO, suggesting, inviting even Putin to attack NATO countries. Joe Biden again today brought that up when he was speaking, saying how angry about it he was. And he has just launched a new campaign ad in swing states, particularly trying to attract those those Americans with roots in Eastern Europe, saying that Donald Trump's comments about NATO were shameful, un-American and dangerous.